The cylinder liner after lifting the piston. Also, measure the inside diameter of the cylinder liner according to the instruction manual. Measure the inside diameter of the cylinder liner with the specified measuring tool. Use the measuring tool of the inside diameter position to measure the specified measuring position in the two directions respectively. Remove the piston pin from the removed piston for checking and maintenance. First, remove the piston pin circlips using pliers. Detach the piston pin while supporting the connecting rod. Secondly, remove the piston ring. Turn over the piston and detach the cover of the piston cooling chamber. Check and maintain the removed parts. Firstly, eliminate the carbon deposited on the outside of the piston and the scale in the cooling chamber. Secondly, check the piston by the penetrate test for cracks on its top surface and ring grooves. If any of them are found with abnormal state, change the parts. Measure the dimension of each piston part and of the piston pin according to the instruction manual. If any of them are used beyond the usage limit, change the parts. Check the connecting rod. First, check the contacts and looseness in fit of the piston pin metals. Also check the condition of crank pin metal. Check the contact on the rear and mating surface of each metal, and also check for seizure and embedded form matters on the sliding surface of each metal. Check for cracks, wear, and scratches on the serration mating surface of big end and bolts of connecting rod. To prevent the bolts from being broken due to fatigue, replace them every 20,000 hours, even if the appearance is normal. Measure each part of the connecting rod according to the instruction manual. If any of them are used beyond the usage limit, change the parts. After finishing the check and maintenance, exchange the necessary parts and assemble the piston and the connecting rod. Put the cover on the piston cooling chamber. At this time, fit its holes on the top of the piston at the marking side pump side. Renew the bolt and the Belleville spring and then tighten them. Assemble the piston ring. Incorporate the oil ring with its coil joint shifted 180 degrees from its cut. Be careful not to mistake a setting order of second ring and top ring. Incorporate the piston rings with their marked sides facing upwards and their cuts shifted 120 degrees from those of the adjacent rings. Incorporate the piston and the connecting rod while aligning their set marks to each other and insert the piston pin. At this time, incorporate the piston pin circlip with its opening facing straight down. Set the crank pin metals on the connecting rod and metal cap. At this time, don't apply lube oil on the rear of the crank pin metals. Screw the lifting eye bolt into the piston and lift it. Install the piston and the connecting rod into the engine. In preparation, apply lube oil on the piston, cylinder liner, and crankshaft after installing the piston guide. Install the piston. At this time, align the set mark on the top of the piston with the fuel injection pump side. Insert the piston while tapping the piston with a resin hammer. Insert the connecting rod bolt into the main unit. Align the connecting rod body with the set mark of the metal cap. Fix the metal cap and tighten the nut. Using the hydraulic jack, tighten the connecting rod nuts. Follow the same procedure for using the hydraulic jack as during assembly. Detach the hydraulic jack and confirm that the set mark is properly aligned. After tightening, check the side motion of connecting rod. If it doesn't move, reassemble it. Finally, assemble the protection ring by hand. I'll explain the overhaul procedure for the main bearing metal and thrust metal. Prepare the hydraulic tool before overhauling the main bearing metal. Prepare the dedicated tool as shown in this video. Let's start the overhaul. First, rotate the flywheel and set the piston next to the main bearing at the position of 120 degrees before top dead center. Install the spacer in the hydraulic jack on the nut of the main bearing bolt, and then attach the hydraulic tool in the same way of the tightening nut of the cylinder head. Secondly, detach the side bolt of the main bearing that will be disassembled and then loosen the next bolts on both sides. Applying hydraulic pressure to the hydraulic jack and loosen the tightening nut of the main bearing bolt. Close the relief valve of the hydraulic pump and then raise the hydraulic pressure to specified value. Insert the exclusive turning bar into the spacer notch, keeping specified hydraulic pressure, and then loosen the nut. After both attachment nuts are loose, remove the hydraulic tool by the same procedure as for the cylinder head nut. After removing the hydraulic jack, loosen the cap nut of the main bearing 2 or 3 turns and set the drawing out tool to the main bearing bolt and fix it to the bolt. Fit the drawing out bolt on the main bearing cap. Turn and draw out the nut. Remove the tightening nut of the main bearing cap and install the holding tool to the bolt. Screw the circular nut onto the holding bolt and fix it to the main bearing bolt to hold the main bearing cap. Firstly, after fixing, detach the lower metal of the main bearing. Remove the upper metal by the detaching attaching pin. Set the detaching attaching pin to the oil hole in the crankshaft of the anti-operating side. The upper metal is pushed and drawn out by turning the flywheel to the rotational direction slowly. Remove the thrust metal. The thrust metal is mounted on the front and the rear of the first main bearing cap on the flywheel side. It is possible to remove both upper and lower thrust metals by hand with drawing out the first main bearing cap as before. Check the removed parts. Check the contact on the rear and mating surface of each metal, and also check for cracks, seizure, and embedded form matters on the surface of each metal. Measure the metal thickness under the instruction, and if it exceeds the limit, replace the metals. After checking, replace the necessary parts and assemble. Incorporate each one of the upper and lower thrust metals from the frontal and the rear parts of the respective former point, not mistaking one for the other. Match the print marking of upper metal to the cylinder block side and assemble it along the crankshaft. Mate the groove with the crankshaft side and incorporate the lower metal. Regarding the assembly of the main bearing, turn the flywheel to lower the oil hole in the crankshaft, below the center of the crankshaft. Direct the pawl of the upper metal towards the anti-operating side and insert the upper metal along the crankshaft. Position the upper metal in the forward-backward direction so that its pawl will mate with the pawl hole in the cylinder block. Attach the inserting implement of upper metal into the main bearing cap. At this time, attach the implement mating its one curved end with the outer side of the main bearing cap clamping bolt on the operating side, and align the other stepped end with the inner side of the main bearing cap. Fit the detaching attaching pin to the oil hole of the crankshaft at the anti-operating side with grease. Screw the circular nut to hold the main bearing cap until just before the inserting tool and the rear of the metal will be touched. Turn the flywheel in a direction reverse to the direction of the engine rotation. Then the pawl of the metal has been aligned with the pawl hole in the crankshaft. Continue turning the flywheel until the metal end aligns with the cylinder block end. Installation of the upper metal is completely finished. Loosen the circular nuts of holding tool to lower the main bearing cap. Remove the metal detaching attaching pin and metal inserting implement. Incorporate the lower metal to the cap. Afterwards, tighten the circular nuts of holding tool and remove the holding bolts. Fit the tightening nuts of the main bearing cap and fasten them until the cap becomes a close contact with the cylinder block. Tighten the side bolt on the anti-operating side to half of the specified torque. Tighten the side bolt on the operating side to its seating by hand. Set the hydraulic jack to tightening nut of main bearing cap and fasten it by specified hydraulic pressure. Finally, tighten the side bolts on the anti-operating and operating sides to the specified torque. After overhauling the main bearing metal, measure the deflection of the crankshaft and the thrust clearance. We explain here how to measure the clearance of the thrust. Fix the stand of dial gauge to the cylinder block and contact the dial gauge with the crankshaft. Firstly, move the crankshaft to the front side and set the dial graduation on point 0. Next, remove the crankshaft to the rear and confirm the value indicated by the dial. This value is the thrust clearance. The value should be approximately as shown. I'll explain the overhaul procedure of the air cooler for every 4,000 to 5,000 hours. This engine is a unit structure air cooler and turbocharger table. The air cooler cores can be removed and installed without detaching the cooler from the main unit. For detaching the air cooler, prepare the tools pictured. Firstly, detach the cooling water pipe at the inlet and outlet of the cooling water and bypass valve. Remove the operation side seal flange, seal gasket, and seal plate. Remove the attachment bolts for the anti-operation side cooler cover and the high-low temperature water intake pipes. Remove the bolts fixed to the core and to the cooler casing. Screw the bolts into the threaded parts of the tube sheet for extraction and jack them up evenly on the right and left at least 75 millimeters. Attach extraction tools A, B to the cooler casing, followed by tool C. Attach extraction tool E with eye bolt attached to the cooler cover. Attach the wire and extract the core, approximately 450 millimeters. To prevent the core from tipping over, insert tool D between the bottom of the core and tools A and B. Slowly extract the core. Attach the eye bolt to the top and lift the core upward. Wash the detached core. Clean the cooling water side tubes by removing both core cooling water covers and brushing with a long-handled brush. After cleaning the fin on the side air with steam or by soaking it in cleaning fluid, clean even more by blowing the compressed air and washing the fin with water. Check the coating on the inner surface of the boost air duct and of its tanks. If the coating is peeled, repair it. Reassemble the air cooler in reverse order from disassembly. Please use all new gaskets and O-rings. Attach the extraction tools to the core. Insert the core about 75 millimeters short of full insertion and detach extraction tools A through D. Fully insert the core and tighten the bolts. I'll explain the maintenance procedure of the lube oil pump. Firstly, disconnect the suction pipe from the lube oil pump and then remove the pump. Remove the pump driver gear, cover, and pump gear from the detached pump of lube oil. After disassembly, check the parts. Firstly, check for abnormal contact or abrasions on the teeth surfaces of the pump gear. Check for flaws and seizure on the side of the pump gear. Check for seizure and abnormal abrasions on the pump gear shaft and gear bush. Check for the contact of drive gear. Reassemble the lube oil pump in reverse order for disassembly. I'll explain the maintenance procedure of the cooling water pump. Firstly, loosen the impeller of the cooling water pump and remove the pump from the engine body. The tightening nut of the impeller is a reverse screw, so turn it clockwise when loosening. Let's disassemble the removed cooling water pump. Turn the impeller clockwise and remove it. Remove the tightening nut, gear, and ball bearing in order. Next, detach the oil seal from the casing. Renew the mechanical seal, oil seal, and bearing under the instruction. Reassemble the cooling water pump in reverse order for disassembly. Be careful not to damage the lip of the oil seal when assembling the shaft. Also, tighten the impeller and